Today we will be reviewing the Omega Speedmaster Mark II racing dial version. The Omega Speedmaster was originally released in 1957. Its main claim to fame was its tachymeter bezel. Prior to that, tachymeters were typically printed on the dial itself. Slightly more than a decade later, Buzz Aldrin wore a Speedmaster on the moon. Not content to rest on their moonwalking laurels, Omega radically redesigned the Speedmaster in 1969. The revision was called the Mark II Professional. There was no Mark I, for what it's worth. There were two dial choices with the steel model, a standard black dial and a more exotic gray-orange nicknamed the Racing Dial. A gold-plated option was also available. While quite different externally, its movement remained the same, caliber 861. According to the late Chuck Maddox, Omega even presented the Mark II to NASA as a Moonwatch replacement. Apparently the offer was turned down, though, due to there not being enough time to test and certify it. That does make you wonder what would have happened to the Speedmaster evolution if it was accepted. As stated earlier, the movement is a 17-joule manual wind caliber 861, which is a descendant of the older column wheel caliber 321. The 861 lost the column wheel and instead became cam switching. Historically, it is very reliable and has a nice hand-winding feel. It first came on the market in 1968. Dimension-wise, it is 41 mm wide without the crown, the height is 13 mm, the lug-to-lug length is 44 mm, and the lug width is 20 mm. This gray-dialed version has obviously lost a lot of its luster over the decades. I'm still unsure if I want to switch out the faded orange hands for new ones. The problem is that they would simply not match the dial then, and I certainly don't want to get rid of the tritium dial. While the case is scratched, it still retains its original brushing. Beware of watches that are rounded from over-polishing. The case back has a very light Seamaster and Seahorse engraving. The latter has been used since 1958 to indicate water resistance. The crown is signed with an Omega symbol, and the bracelet should be an 1162 with straight end links. Omega released an updated version of the Mark II a short while ago. Suffice to say, it is considerably more expensive than the original Mark II. Might very well be the only person on the planet who prefers the Mark II to the original Moonwatch. Much like on the Flightmaster, I love the orange hands, even though mine are faded. If you catch it in the right light, it really shines, and I get a pathetic amount of pleasure from that. I don't know what to say, that's just the way it is. Another great advantage is that this watch has hidden lugs, which make it easier to wear on a smaller wrist. If you happen to like the dial more so than the case, you have options too. There have been a few Moonwatches that actually had this racing dial. One is the ultra-rare and very controversial early 70s version, and there was also a limited edition released in Japan in 2004. Now, servicing the 861 movement is pretty straightforward with third parties, as there are a good supply of parts available. This will start changing slowly in January as Omega stops selling parts to third-party distributors, though. Lastly, assuming the Chuck Maddox story I mentioned earlier is true, it's also nice to know that Omega thought it was good enough for space travel. Price-wise, you can sometimes get an exotic dial in the low $1,000 range, which, all things considered, I think is a pretty good deal. That's about it for this review, and as usual, thanks for watching.